Okay, so it's time for the third and the final, The Bull Rider's Son. And it's by Cathy McDavid, and I'm doing this without glasses, so let's go. Page 239. Wow, she was barely recognized herself. This wasn't how she behaved. Shane had completely changed not just her life, but her. He'd given her courage, filled the large empty void surrounding her heart, taught her to let go of what wasn't important while still holding on to what was. That's a good man, honey. It was the tip of her tongue to tell him how much he'd come to mean to her, but she just couldn't. One of those communication breakdowns I just got through talking about. Page 252 and 253. I'd like to see where this leads. I'd have a chance to make a real life for myself and Bria here in Reckless. I'm thinking that I'd like my life to include you and Benji. Her expression softened. I'd like to see where it leads to, but I should warn you, I'm not the easiest person to get along with, even on my good days. Sweetheart, I wouldn't have you any other way. Oh, this man is just a dreamboat. That was page 253. 262. I've been talking to Cheryl and Shane. They're both in agreement. Shane? What does he have to do with this? It was his idea, actually. He suggested we stay another day in Reckless and that I talk to Benji about additional visitation, possibly taking him for an entire summer. Cassidy swayed, feeling as if she'd been shoved from behind. This couldn't be happening to her. Benji was slipping through her fingers, and Shane was the one responsible. Page 272, 273, and 274. Well, he's threatening to take me to court if I don't cooperate. Cooperate how? Allow more visitation. Let him take Benji for part of the year. Did you say no? She suppressed a groan. It's not the visitation I object to. It's his methods. He insists on talking to Benji alone without me. He says that Benji will be more receptive, but what he's doing is pitting Benji against me. That doesn't sound like Hoyt. Exactly like Hoyt. He bullied me when we were dating. Bullied is a pretty strong word. I'm not making this up. I admit he can be overbearing. He said you and he talked about the fishing trip, and this was your suggestion. Shane shook his head. That's not true. You suggested Hoyt take Benji fishing on Saturday when he gave Benji the rod and reel. Hoyt did call me this morning right after you left the trailer and asked Judy about custody arrangements with Judy. What did you tell him? I said I value each moment I spend with my daughter and I regret the years I missed. I suggested he takes advantage of every opportunity to see Benji. All the rest, the fishing trip, visitation, the custody suit, is entirely his doing. Cassidy supposed it was possible for Hoyt to have taken Shane's words and put his own twist on them. Or maybe Cheryl had influenced him. Look, Shane continued, Hoyt is single-minded. When he wants something, the more you dig in your heels, the more he'll push. Give a little and he'll give a little too, possibly back off entirely. Deacon had said pretty much the same thing to Cassidy during their call. Do you really think that? Shane nodded. I'll call him later, talk some sense into him. Thank you. Hoyt did listen to Shane. He put his arm around her and she leaned into him rather than resist. He was looking out for her, after all, and were she honest, she'd admit how good it felt to have someone special in her life to count on. This has me rattled, she said. Hoyt keeps saying one thing and doing another. He's always been impetuous. Benji was a lot like that, too. Hardly began one task and then he was off to another. Worst case, the lake wasn't that far. If needed, she could drive there and get Benji. Though she probably was getting ahead of herself. Hoyt had promised they'd be home by 1 o'clock. That was page 274. Page 278, 279, 280, 281, 82, 83, 84, 85, and 86. Frankly, Shane couldn't believe his ears. What was his brother thinking? Fishing was one thing, but leaving Reckless with Benji before Cassidy had reached for a formal custody agreement, it was heartless and cruel. It also would hurt his case when the time came to appear before the judge. Shane reached for his phone on the table, intending to call Hoyt. They probably haven't even boarded the plane yet. Their flight's not for another hour. She stared at him, confusing, clouding her features. Plane? What are you talking about? You said Hoyt took Benji. He did. Aren't they on their way to the airport? They're still at the lake, Cassidy's voices broke. Hoyt rented a boat. They're staying overnight. At the lake? Shane let the information sink in. Not the airport? Yes, Cassidy resumed pacing. Hoyt promised to have Benji home by noon. I called and called and called. He didn't even answer his phone until 2. Then it was to tell me he was keeping Benji whether I liked it or not. Look, I'm not defending Hoyt's tactics, so don't misunderstand me. She halted mid-step. Don't say you're siding with him. Of course I'm not siding with him. Then why would I misunderstand you? Calm down and let's put this in perspective, okay? Benji's all right. Shane paused. He is all right, yes? You did talk to him. Not at first. Hoyt wouldn't let me. We had a big fight and then he finally put Benji on. He shouldn't have done that, no question. But again, Benji's fine. You know where he is and he'll be home by tomorrow. Concentrate on those things. Hoyt swore he'd have Benji home today. What guarantee do I have that he won't pull the same stunt tomorrow? He has a rodeo coming this weekend and Cheryl works. They have to get home. And Benji has school tomorrow, which he's going to miss. It's one day. That's not the point. I understand you're angry, Cassidy. Hoyt was out of line. He put you through a lot of needless worry, but Benji is also his son, a son he hardly knows. Wanting to spend more time with him is understandable. You could cut him some slack. Did you know he was planning on taking Benji? Shane didn't like the accusation in her tone. If I did, I'd have insisted that he tell you. I'm sorry I'm taking the frustration out on you. She buried her face in her hands. I was just so worried, and I still am. Hoyt won't let anything happen to Benji. I just wish you hadn't encouraged him. Wait a minute, Shane straightened. This isn't my fault. Hoyt was ready to leave today. Then he talked to you. Benji had a choice. Did you ask him if he wanted to spend the night with his father? No. Was the answer because you didn't want to hear the answer? Her eyes widened and narrowed. The problem here is Hoyt, she snapped. Not me or Benji. There are always two sides to every story. Implying what exactly? It's possible you're hanging on too tight to Benji, being too controlling. She recoiled as if it was struck. I'm no such thing. You're used to dictating Benji's every action without having to consider anyone else. Now there's Hoyt. It's a big change and it will take some getting used to. Judy's going through the same growing pains with Bria and me. Have you ever taken Bria without Judy's permission? We've already agreed Hoyt was wrong. Rehashing it won't solve the problem. What will? She stabbed her chest with her thumb. Me admitting I'm a control freak? He didn't react to her anger. If you are, you come by it naturally. Didn't you tell me last night when your father first came back to Reckless, he strong-armed your mother and forced her to accept her as a business partner? I am nothing like my father. You do like to be in charge. Hoyt broke his promise. Shane swore he could see steam pouring from her ears. Maybe he wouldn't have if he thought you'd listen to reason. I let him take Benji, and that was reasonable. Let him? Benji isn't a possession. As if collapsing from the inside, she stacked her hands on the table and laid her head down. Shane could have kicked himself if trying to get through to her he'd been too harsh. You're choosing Hoyt over me, she said, in a small, defeated tone. I'm not. Given the choice, he sat down next to her. Since there was no room, he slid to the other side of the table. You've been holding on to Benji so long and so fiercely you don't know how to let go even a little. I don't want to let go. I'm afraid of what will happen. Right, her brother. Did you, mother, ever let Ryder visit your dad? Of course not. Her head shot up. Dad was an alcoholic. Say he wasn't. Would your mom would have let Ryder and you go to Kingman? I don't know, maybe. But what difference does that make? If you were going to give Benji a little freedom, he might not abandon you like Ryder did. There's a big difference between me giving Benji freedom and Hoyt taking him, she snapped. I don't disagree, simply making a suggestion. I could drive to the lake. Cassidy looked at him expectantly. You could come with me. Shane sat back. Don't do that. You're showing up unannounced will make matters worse. I just want to check on Benji. Take him some things. He needs pajamas, a toothbrush, and clean clothes for tomorrow. It won't hurt him to sleep in his clothes one night. Shane had done much worse during his rodeo days. And I'm sure the Marina store sells toothbrushes. Cassidy wrung her hands. Benji's never been away from home more before, except for spending the night at the Tatums. Let it go, Cassidy. She stared out the tiny trailer window into the darkness. How about I fix dinner here, he said. We'll go to bed early, start fresh in the morning, and have a good night's sleep. She looked at him. You could drive out there. I'm not. Seriously, enough was enough. At his sharp reply, Cassidy sprang from the seat. I thought you cared about me. I do, which is why I've spent the last 20 minutes listening to your rant. Rant? Sorry, wrong choice of words. Her features crumbled. I trusted you. I haven't let you down. You won't drive out to the lake? If I would if there was a reason, but Benji's fine. You're the first man I've let get close to me since Hoyt, she stiffened. I thought you were different. Shane's temper snapped. He'd been making allowances for her because she was under enormous stress. No more. That's unfair and uncalled for. She narrowed her gaze. Caring for someone means unconditional support. I do support you, and I'll talk to Hoyt, but I'm not going to go out to that lake like some crazed person and search for them, especially when I don't feel that Hoyt's entirely at fault. And you think I am. He sighed. This is arguing for the sake of arguing. She whirled and headed for the door. Well, she warned him about her stubborn streak. Cassidy, don't go. Not like this. We're done. Good idea. A cooling off period might benefit them both. I'll call you later, he said. Better yet, I'll come by the house. Don't bother. She stopped at the door. I won't see you. He didn't like the finality in her voice and crossed the room in 2 steps. Today or again? She refused to turn around. Cassidy, you're breaking my heart, Shane. She left without a backward glance. Page 289 and 290. She was an amazing person, a loving and devoted mother, a hard worker with an incredibly passionate nature that, when ignited by the right spark, was a wonder to behold. That same passion, unfortunately, could also take the form of anger, obstinacy, and tunnel vision. Life with her would never be boring. It would also be a challenge, and Shane had begun asking himself if he was up to the task. It was possible that they had rushed into their relationship before either of them was ready. They were both still putting their lives in order. Shane had a new daughter and a new job. Cassidy had recently reconciled with her estranged brother and father. Wasn't tonight enough proof that they were ill-prepared for challenges facing them? One fight, and Cassidy was ready to call it quits. His chest tightened. She had called it quits. This was no cooling-off period. 2 visits, 4 phone calls, 3 texts, all unanswered. Couldn't be denied. The realization left him feeling hollow inside. Closing his laptop, he began getting ready for a shower in bed. His steps were slow and spirits low. Foolishly, he hoped he and Cassidy could beat the odds. He should probably be glad to get out early before they hurt each other worse than they already had. Hadn't history shown them that they didn't have what it took for the long haul? Heck, this time they haven't even lasted a month. That was 290. Page 306, 307, 308, 309, 310, 311, 312. Tatum's smile broadened. Will wonders never cease? 2 adults communicating and coming to a sensible mutual agreement. Somehow I get the feeling you're not talking about me and Hoyt. Oh, I am. I just wish I was talking about you and Shane. I confess, Hoyt and I both acted badly. We allowed our emotions to get the better of us. Yet think? But Shane, Cassidy couldn't go on. The pain had yet to lessen. The man is plumb crazy for you. Then why did he side with Hoyt against me? Good grief. Tatum clapped a hand to her forehead in frustration. You think because he didn't completely 100% agree with you, he disagreed. Excuse me, but isn't that the definition of disagreeing? Not at all. Nothing ever is black and white. Shane saw both your side and Hoyt's and understood them. He tried to be the mediator, encouraged you both to compromise, which, according to you, was a huge mistake. I was a little hard on him, Cassidy conceded. A little? I was scared, all right. I know, honey. Tatum's tone softened. The last few weeks have been rough on you and a big adjustment, but the world hasn't ended, and the thing you feared the most came and went, and you're still standing. Granted with a few expectant cuts and bruises, but you survived intact, other than losing a great guy that you're head over heels in love with. Who said I was in love? Cassidy asked with a small voice. You didn't have to. Anyone with half an eye can see it. It's too late for us, she said. Tatum waved her off. It's only too late if you let him leave. Leave? Cassidy panicked. Has he taken a new job? If your dad fires him, he will. Cassidy had made enough mistakes. She refused to be responsible for Shane losing his job. Where are they? If you're talking about your parents, they're at the livestock pens behind the arena. The team pinning jackpot is tonight. Cassidy didn't hear whatever else Tatum had to say. In a blink of an eye, she was out the office door, charging across the open to the arena. Her parents must have sensed her coming. They turned in her direction well before she reached them, and with one look on her face, at her father's arm around her mother's waist, and Cassidy instantly knew something was up. I'm glad you're here, her mother said after casting Cassidy's father a shy glance. We have news. Cassidy ground to a stop in front of them. You finally said yes. You're getting married. It was, she supposed, inevitable. What? Her mother blinked in surprise. No. She keeps stalling me, her father grumbled, then gave her mother a resounding peck on the cheek. I'm moving into the house this weekend. We thought you should be the first to know, her mother said. Cassidy waited, expected to be flooded with doubts and possibly anger. It didn't happen. Quite the opposite, in fact. She was overcome with, was this even possible? Contentment? I'm glad for you. Are you sure? Yes, in fact, I think it's great. As much as you two fight, you're happier together than you are apart. That's how it usually is when you're in love. Cassidy heard her father, as if from a distance. The past weeks replayed in her mind. Shane's arrival at Easy Money, their building attraction and fervent kisses, the night he took her to the dinner at the Hole in the Wall. He pushed her, it was true, made her face her fears and do right by her son. He also been her friend, her lover, and confidant. Tatum was right. This had been the hardest time of her life. It had also been the happiest she could remember because of Shane. Cassidy did love him. Tatum was right about that too. She loved him with all her heart. Yet she'd driven him away, made them both miserable, and possibly cost him his job. I'm so pleased that you're okay with it, her mother beamed. We were worried. Yeah, fine, whatever. She turned toward her father. About Shane, you're not firing him, did you hear me? Hell's bells, I'm not firing him. Where would I find a better bull manager? I heard he was on probation. Her father grimaced guiltily. He might have been, but no longer? I suppose I should tell him. The man suffered long enough. You haven't? Cassidy was appalled. When did you change your mind? Her mother asked, evidently not in the loop. A few days ago, after Benji told me about the phone call. What call? Cassidy said, and her mother both said simultaneously. According to Benji, it was Shane who convinced Hoyt to bring him home last weekend. Hoyt wasn't going to at first. Shane did? Cassidy's jaw dropped. He never said a word. Did you give him the chance? No, she hadn't. That doesn't explain why he wouldn't take credit. Page 311. You aren't the easiest person to approach. From the time she was 10, she diligently kept people at a distance. What had gotten at her? She might have safeguarded her heart, but it had turned stone cold. She didn't want to live her life alone. Tears blurred her vision. I've spent years being afraid of nothing. Her mother put an arm around her. That seems to be the curse of this family. I've been awfully unfair to him. Tell him. He doesn't want nothing to do with me. She struggled to bring her crying jag under control. I doubt it. He's still here. Rather than drain her, Cassidy's outburst invigorated her. Was it possible for her perspective to change so quickly? Or had it been changing all along, day by day, with Shane? Is he here? She glanced around expectantly. Took the day off, her father said, mentioned some errands and picking up Bria. His daughter. Shane was such a good father, the best. He would have been such a good stepdad to Benji, too. She and Shane talked about it mornings they woken up together. They could have had that every morning if she hadn't messed it up. He'll be back later this afternoon for the team pitting jackpot. Could Cassidy wait until then? Then again, what choice did she have? Just her luck. She finally came to her senses, and Shane wasn't around for her to first apologize, and then ask him to forgive her fit of a temper. What if he refused? She had all day ahead of her to worry about it. Page 312. Good, I'm telling you. Page 314, 315, 316, 17, and 18. Well, it looks like we're going to just be reading until the epilogue now, so take a deep seat. Page 314. He'd have to check with Cassidy first, of course, fully aware he was manufacturing an excuse for them to talk. He'd been doing that a lot lately, without much success. When she got mad at someone, she evidently stayed mad a good long time. Damned if that wasn't infuriating and addictive. When he wasn't wanting to rail at her, he wanted to kiss her till she begged him to stop. Never had he felt this strongly for a woman. She would be impossible to get over, and harder still when every night she visited his dreams and every day she invaded his thoughts. Okay. He and Bria pulled the trailer and parked. He studied the temporary home while Bria scrambled from the car seat and ran inside. He needed a new place soon, real soon. A trailer where there was no place to raise a little girl. For a while he'd thought maybe he and Cassidy and Benji could find a house in Reckless, one with an extra room for Bria. That idea had gone up in smoke, and he had no one to fault but himself. He told Cassidy he understood her fears and concerns and sympathized with them. The truth was, he hadn't. Not until it was too late. She and Hoyt weren't him and Judy. They were two different people with different histories and an entirely different relationship. He had been wrong to assume Cassidy would feel and act like Judy or Hoyt like him, simply because their circumstances were similar. In hindsight, he should have done exactly what Cassidy needed and asked for, supported her unconditionally, and gone to the marina, insisting Hoyt return Benji home. The mistake had cost him dearly. Grabbing Bria's small suitcase and backpack from the floor of the truck, he carried both inside. At least he kept his job. Mercer had called earlier today to let Shane know that he wasn't on probation anymore. Thank God for that much. Mercer hadn't offered an explanation other than to say he'd spoken to Cassidy and all is well. What did he mean? Shane would probably never find out. Okay. Page 316. 2 days ago, Shane had found a chance to speak with Benji about their relationship, clarifying his role as uncle. Benji seemed to understand, which relieved Shane. He didn't want to confuse the boy further. I was planning on coming along, he told Benji, but you'll have to ask your mom first. It's okay with me. Shane swung around at the sound of Cassidy's voice. She was here, within a few feet of him. Every cell in his body jumped to high alert. God, he missed her. Hey, he croaked out, his throat having gone bone dry. She looked incredible, and not just because she was perpetually on his mind. There was something different about her. A glint in her eyes, a lightness to her step, a softness to her mouth that was in stark contrast to the thin, hard line of late. What he was so desperate to know accounted for the change. He had to find out. Can I talk to you? She smiled. Smiled! I was about to ask you the same thing. Shane didn't wait. He lifted Bria on top of Skittles and settled her into the youth's side saddle, and Benji was already climbing on top of Rusty. Come on, Benji said to Bria once he said, and then nudged the mule to a trot. Race ya. Bria followed the boy in hot pursuit. Shane could warn the boy to go slow. She takes after you, Cassidy said, watching the two children. They shouldn't run the horses down the barn aisle. Page 318. Actually, they're trotting, not running, and I find it difficult to believe that you never did anything like that at their age. I did. I plead the fifth. This comfortable, casual banter was the kind of interaction Shane had been hoping for with Cassidy, the kind they once shared. He'd rather be more, but he'd accept friendship. What happened, he asked when they reached the end of the aisle and stepped onto the open area. You're not mad anymore. I'm not sure where to begin. Try. An epiphany, I guess, she laughed quietly, or a severe reprimand from Tatum and my parents. They told me that what I already knew. Sometimes we need to hear it from someone else. She gazed up at him with those incredible luminous dark eyes. You're right. All around them the arena buzzed with activities. Students arriving for the afternoon riding classes, vehicles and trailers hauling horses, and participants for their team pitting event. The Beckett's, Mercer, Sunny, Ryder, Liberty, and all hard at work. Benji and Bria rode around the pen, joined now by Tatum and her children, who begged to ride double. Oh, hold on a second. Put this right here while we take a break. Sorry. Home. Shane couldn't get that word out of his head. He felt as if easy money was the right place for him, and Bria, from the day he arrived. Sooner, in fact, from the moment he had driven across the town line into Reckless. Cassie had been a large part of that. Is there any chance we can start over, he asked. We probably should talk first. Hope blazed inside him. She hadn't said no. Before he could respond, she cradled his cheeks in her hands and drew him down for a full-blown mouse-fused together kiss. And, like each time before, she rocked his world. A blank stare was all he could muster. Then she released him. You okay? She asked. Yeah. Was he? What was that for? Added insurance in case you don't accept my apology. You have nothing to apologize for. I do. You've always been there for me, and I was wrong to accuse you differently. I forced you to tell Hoyt about Benji. Page 320. I needed forcing. My family's a mess. I was a mess. I didn't want the same for Benji and convinced myself that hiding him from Hoyt was the only solution. It wasn't. Isn't. The future Shane had lost him appeared again on the horizon. Then things will work out with Hoyt. They will, sooner or later. I'm committed. Hoyt is too. We spoke last Thursday, cleared the air, set some ground rules we both can live with. I'm glad. Thank you. The glint was back in her eyes. You've been a good friend and a good uncle to Benji. I'd like to be more. I know. I wouldn't be here if I didn't. He had to be sure he understood correctly that she wanted and what he did. Are you saying what I think you are? Her cheeks blushed a pretty pink Shane found sexy as all get out. I'd like for us to date. He grinned. There was no doubt what he'd been waiting for, praying for. No. No, she stumbled backward. My mistake. He captured her hand in his. The only thing you're mistaken about is dating. I won't settle for that. I'm confused. She looked it too. He hauled her around the corner where they were out of sight. What about the kids? She protested. Tatum's with them. They'll be all right for a minute, which is all the time I need. For what? Cassidy, he dipped his head and nuzzled her ear. I love you. It's too soon. She closed her eyes, trembled when he planted tiny kisses along the side of her neck. Are you saying you don't love me too? Yes? He moved toward her mouth, ready to kiss a confession out of her. He didn't have to. I do, she whispered against his lips. Love you. He cut her off with a searing hot kiss that went on and on. This was the missing piece, he thought, with though the haze surrounded his brain. The last one he needed to make his home, his life, complete. Marry me, he said when they finally broke apart. You're crazy. You know, she laughed, the sound lovely and bright. Shane lifted her by the waist and hauled her against him. Is that a yes? We can't. No? She became more serious. What about your brother? How will he feel? Shane set her down, but he didn't let her go. We'll figure it out. And Benji and Bria, they're already confused. They'd go from being cousins to stepbrother and stepsister. Sweetheart, we can do this. Look at what your parents overcame. If they can work through their differences, we can too. She relaxed in his arms, and he took her by he took her and took he took she relaxed in his arms, and he took heart. I love you, and I'm committed to you and the family we'll have. We need to go slow, Cassidy insisted. Sounds reasonable. A month or two should do it. You're joking, naturally. A little. Shane kissed her again, this time a quick brush of his lips. He'd save the real celebration until later when they were alone. I haven't met a woman yet I wanted to put a ring on her finger until you. Shane. He could grow used to her saying his name like that. Marry me, Cassidy, soon, this summer, next year. I don't care, as long as you do. She kept him waiting another grundling few seconds before ending his agony. Yes, but I do want to date a while first. Shane pulled her to him. I'm going to make you happy, I swear it. You already have. You've given me my family that I've always wanted and never thought was possible. She'd taken the words right out of his mouth. You have to read what happens 3 months later. I'm not going to tell you. I'm giving this book a 20. You got to read it. It brought me to tears. What I love about books and movies, for the most part, usually they end where everything works itself out. I know they say if things are meant to be, they'll be. It would be nice to live a storybook life, a Hallmark movie. Good night, friends and family. Make sure you're keeping your social distance, you're washing your hands, you're wearing your mask. United we stand, divided we fall.